Jacqueline Fassler-Kerstetter, and I want to talk to you a little bit about the Franz Strauss Concerto, which is the all-state piece for today. And what I'm going to do is give you just a few practicing tips for each of the sections. We'll begin by talking about A through B. I think what's very important, and something I know that I struggled with when I was in high school, was getting a really clean attack on the very first note. It could be that's because D, which is fingered thumb 1 and 2, tends to be a sharp note, or it could just be that at the time I lacked confidence. So there are a few things you can do to help yourself securely hit a D. One of them is that you do want to be able to play or to buzz it on your mouthpiece in tune. So I'm just going to check the D here. And now I'm going to play it on my mouthpiece and hope that I play it in tune. Okay, you heard I started a little bit sharp, which meant I could have cracked it. So let's see if we can play it more in tune. So that's something you'll want to practice at home. You'll also notice that I had a lot of error, like with my articulation, there was sound that happened immediately. The mouthpiece is great because if you're a little bit late with your error, you'll hear a little pop or you'll hear that things aren't quite perfect. So you want to go for a really clean attack. The other thing you can do is you can practice air attacks, because air attacks, the only way you're going to get that sound to come out immediately is if you have good air support. So you take out the tongue and you just practice. And you get that coordinated. Once you can do an air attack, you can very easily place your tongue and just go doo, right? All right, so that will help with that very first note. The other difficult things about this section would just be figuring out what to do with the grace notes. So my recommendation for the first set of grace notes that you find, which are 3 after A, is that you play those 2/16 grace notes on the and of 1. I'm going to demonstrate very slowly so you can hear this. I'm going to set the B at 66, and I'm going to add the 8th note. Okay, that's the 8th note. And I'm going to aim for the AG 16ths to be on the and of 1. 2. Could you hear that? So those grace notes were on the and of 1. One more time. 1, 2, 3. All right. So then once you get that coordinated, it'll be very simple to play that third measure after A. Regarding the triplets that happen in the beginning of the third staff, what you should do with that first off is you should practice just playing the triplets without the grace note. And I would even say don't worry about the tie yet, just play straight on that first G that's at the very beginning of line 3, like this. Like that. And then if that feels good, the goal will be that you want to put that grace note like in between those first 2 G's, right? So it'll be sort of like it's on the and of the first G. So this is triplets without the grace note. And this is adding the grace note. And so the idea is you want the triplets to sound exactly the same. You're just adding that little bit of a grace note. Now, I took that a bit under tempo, and that's what you should always do is practice under tempo first, get it coordinated, and then add, little by little, go faster and faster, keeping it coordinated the whole time. That's going to be the quickest way to get better at any passage. The other tricky thing about this little line is the fact that you are tying from beat 4 into beat 1. And so when you're practicing again, you can put the metronome. I'm going to be nice and slow. This is 66. And I'm going to start on beat 4 at the end of the second line. 1, 2. All right. So Just practicing that over and over again and then getting it a little faster and a little faster is what's going to help keep your air moving. And then after you hit that high G, keep the air moving for that low E flat, right? So just doing that connection. Yeah, keep that nice and strong for that lower E flat also. Those would be my main recommendations for this section. The other thing is just really blow through it, keep it very legato, make it very singing. This should be in a singing style. For section D through E, I think the main focus of your practice is going to be on those 16th passages. And my recommendation, of course, is always start by practicing very slowly. In addition to practicing this very slowly, you want to make sure as you're playing your downwards arpeggios that you keep your air moving through all of your tonguing, and maybe even think about crescendoing a little bit to give more strength to those lower notes. A good practice method is to slur all of it, and once again I'm going to do this under tempo. Alright, so when I slur, what I'm teaching myself is this is what my air should feel like, and this is what my air should feel like even when I tongue. So now when I add my tongue, I keep my air moving like that. It's going to make it feel so much easier than if I'm just thinking about tonguing only. Right? So that will really help a lot in simplifying it. Then as you practice it, you get it clean at a slow tempo, speed it up a little bit, get it clean, speed it up a little bit, and you'll get it up there. As a judge, when I've listened to All-State or district auditions, one thing I always appreciate is when a student plays something at a tempo they can handle. So they're not just trying to slop through something real fast, but that they're playing at a tempo they can handle. So I would recommend to you, even if you're a little under tempo right now, we would rather hear you do that and do it really cleanly than hear you try to do up to tempo and then it's not like really clean. One other thing about this section, like just through this passage, is that sometimes we reach so much for the high G that we make a big deal about the G, and then everything else after it's a little messy. So remember that when we slur through it, you keep the air moving, right? And that's the idea, even when we're doing some of the tonguing, is that we keep the air moving, and by doing that, the high G is not the big deal, right? It's just a note. What's the big deal is that we're blowing our air all the way down to that lower note. I suggest an alternate fingering for this passage. If maybe before the All-State audition you could learn it, it will make life easier. And that is starting on that B flat arpeggio coming down. So you have your high G and your F and your D and your B flat. Very typical, that's what we always do. keep your thumb down for the F in the middle register. See how it's the same fingering as an octave higher, and 1 and 2 for your D, same fingering as an octave higher. And then I like to open up to my F horn side for that B flat because I just think it has a nicer tone quality on that long quarter note B flat. So try those fingerings. In the beginning of the piece when this section played, you'll see that I used a PDF that had suggestions of those fingerings, and you can always email me if you'd like to get a copy of that PDF. I'll send it to you also. So those will be the fingerings for that. For the next passage, there are some things that are easier about it and then some things that are a little harder. What's easier is the approach is easier because it's just eighth notes. But what might feel a little harder for us at first is that the arpeggio is a little spookier sounding, I guess, would be a good way. Halloween's coming up, right? So we can say this is spooky. If I play this arpeggio backwards, that's a pretty spooky sound, and yet we have to play it from the upper note down. I would recommend alternate fingerings for this also, and that will be for your middle G flat that you use thumb 1 and 2, your E flat 1 with the thumb and the C open, and the low A 1 and 2 also, just everything on thumb, okay? Then when you go back up to the G flat, make sure you play a G flat and not a G natural. Lots of students forget about that. So that's a G flat. I'm going to play it very slowly. Hopefully you can see the alternate fingerings. Let me turn this way. And then once you get to the quarter note G flat, do not use thumb 1 and 2. Go back to your F side because it just has a better tone quality. I'll play that slowly one more time so you can see the fingerings. And then after you get that coordinated, just start playing it faster and faster and faster. And that will be it for this section. The più lento, just make it very, very singing, and that section should go fine for you. Listen to a lot of recordings and emulate the style that you hear at that point. I'm going to speak briefly about section F on the second page, and my number one just teaching method is to always tell my students practice slowly first. If you practice this slowly first, you will build a foundation and you will end up being able to learn this and get faster and faster more quickly than if you just try to play it quickly from the beginning. There are a couple tricky spots, and I'm just going to address those a little bit here. In the second line on the second page, you'll see that there's some of those grace notes that are basically between 16ths that are moving pretty quickly. My recommendation when you're practicing this at first is to leave the grace notes out and make sure you have everything timed exactly as it should be. And then after that, you can add the grace notes. The grace notes in that measure will be on equal to the second 16th of that set of 16ths, right? So let me play it for you under tempo, and this will be the first measure of the second line. notes were on the second 16th. Listen again. So when you're practicing at first, leave that out. And then if you get that coordinated really well, add the grace notes. Now what I did is I slowed down even more because you might have to take it at that tempo to coordinate those 16ths at first. But as you practice it more and more, you'll be able to coordinate those, I shouldn't say 16ths, those grace notes. You'll be able to get those more and more coordinated. Another thing that I would recommend as you're building towards getting towards the end of a piece is I want to recommend a couple fingerings that might help notes pop out a little more easily for you, so you can try them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The fifth line, as you're approaching that high B flat, I recommend that you use thumb and open for your high A, and then just your typical fingering for your high B flat. Thumb and open is a little less tubing, and sometimes it's just a little bit easier to hit. And so you might want to practice using thumb and open for that high A to the B flat. And then remember, the B flat arpeggio, use the same fingerings that I mentioned on the first page, and that is after your high B flat, you have your F and your D and your B flat. That's normal. Keep your thumb down for your middle F, your middle D, and then your low B flat, you can even keep thumb down for that since it's such a short note at that point. So that's going to be what's important there. And then as you do the scales at the end also, then remember that as you're approaching that high B flat, there's actually a really nice alternate fingering that makes it so much easier. And that is that after your D, you have E flat and F. After you do that, you can play G on 1, A on open, and B flat on 1. So from E flat, F, G, A, B flat is a really, really easy fingering, and it just makes it so much easier to play that scale going up. Here, I'll turn this down a little bit so you can see the fingers. Okay. You see how easy that is? It's just like boop, 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 like really, really easy. So I would recommend that fingering as you're approaching that high B flat, which will make it so much easier. Lastly, I don't think that you're required to play the trill, but I'll just mention a little bit about how you can begin working on trills. And that is that really what's happening when we trill is we're just moving the back of our tongue going ah ya 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 ya, like that. Like it's sort of like whistling if you can whistle. And you know how our tongue is actually what changes the pitch inside of our mouth. It's the same for a trill. So one of the things you can practice if you're working on that C trill is you can sort of aim between the C at first, like aim for C sharp, and then slip down to the C, and your tongue will go from the ah on the C to an E to hit the D. And then after you can play C to D really fast, just do C, D, C. Now you're not seeing a lot of movement here because I'm not doing a lot of movement here. Everything is in my tongue is just going aya, aya, aya. When you add four notes, it's ay, 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 and then ay. And so finally, that trill, after working on it for a while, it's just like you're sort of cracking a note. You're in between two notes and your tongue's going up and down and back, and hopefully that trill will come out for you. Whether it does or not, don't worry, because I think, for Allstate, they don't require for you to do the lip trill, but that would just be a hint for you to learn lip trill. So the main thing, practice slowly, do all the articulation as written in the page. And if you find that it's getting a little stodgy, meaning your throat is getting tight, you're having a hard time in here, I would recommend practicing all slurred. Sorry. Practice all slurred, get that air moving, and then just add the articulation as written. It's all about the air. So keep that in mind when you're working on this. Start slowly, work your way faster and faster. Try the alternate fingerings that I recommended, and best of luck. Feel free to contact me by email if you have any questions or you would like any extra help with your All-State preparation. You'll find me at K-State, and just look for the Horn Professor at K-State. And good luck to all of you with your All-State and your district auditions this year.